The distress signal from deep space. The Odyssey glided silently through the dark abyss of space, its sleek hull reflecting the faint glow of distant stars. Inside the command bridge, Captain Elias Archer stood tall, his sharp eyes scanning the vast emptiness ahead. The ship was on a routine patrol mission, ensuring the safety of trade routes and monitoring deep space anomalies. Yet nothing about today would be routine. "Captain, we've picked up something unusual," called out Alex Chen, the ship's communications officer. His fingers danced over the glowing interface, refining the signal. "It's faint but persistent. I think it's an SOS." A hush fell over the bridge as the crew turned toward the main screen. A deep space distress signal was rare. Most civilizations had their own systems in place. If this was an emergency beacon, it meant someone, somewhere, was in serious trouble. "Origin?" Archer asked, stepping forward. Alex tapped a few keys, frowning. "It's unclear. The signal is bouncing off debris fields, making it hard to trace directly. But it's not from any known human vessel." The weight of that statement settled over the room. The Interstellar Alliance had yet to encounter true deep space alien life forms. There had been hints, abandoned technology, ruins of long-dead civilizations, but never a direct call for help from something non-human. "Lieutenant Cassidy, adjust our trajectory. Bring us closer to the source, but keep our distance," Archer ordered. "Aye, Captain," Cassidy replied, her hand steady on the ship's flight controls. The Odyssey altered its course, its powerful thrusters propelling it toward the unknown. A soft beep interrupted the tense silence. "We're closing in," reported Morgan Blake, the ship's navigator. "There's something out there, about 3 clicks ahead. Looks like a vessel, or what's left of one." On the main screen, the image sharpened. A massive derelict ship floated lifelessly in space, its hull scarred with deep gashes. Sections were completely missing, exposing dark corridors to the cold vacuum. The vessel's design was unlike anything in human records. The structure was elongated, curved, with intricate, almost organic-looking plating. This was no human creation. "That ship's seen hell," muttered Sergeant Dalton, the ship's weapons specialist. He instinctively hovered his hands over the defense systems, prepared for anything. "Energy readings?" Archer asked. "Minimal," replied Blake. "Faint power signatures. Maybe emergency systems are still active, but they won't last long." Archer's mind raced. This wasn't just a derelict. If there was a distress signal, then something, or someone, was still inside. "Alex, open a hailing frequency," Archer ordered. "Broadcast in every standard frequency and known communication patterns." Alex's voice was clear and professional as he spoke. "Unknown vessel, this is the Odyssey, a human exploration and rescue ship. We have received your distress signal. Do you require assistance?" The bridge fell silent as the message echoed into the void. Seconds ticked by, then minutes. No response. Alex said finally, shaking his head. "Try again. Repeat the message every 30 seconds, Archer said. He turned to Dr. Fiona Hayes, the ship's medical officer. "Prepare a boarding team. If there's anyone alive on that ship, they may need medical attention." Fiona nodded, already mentally preparing for whatever lay ahead. Then something unexpected happened. The alien ship moved. It was subtle, a slow, unnatural drift. But it wasn't from momentum. It was intentional. "Captain," Cassidy said, her voice unusually tense, "that ship is shifting its orientation. It's turning toward us." The bridge's alert lights flickered. A new signal came through, faint, broken, but unmistakably a response. Alex scrambled to translate it. "It's patchy. It's barely holding together." He listened carefully, his expression darkening. "What's it saying?" Archer demanded. Alex hesitated. "It's not a request for help anymore, sir." He looked up. "It's a warning. Entering the unknown." The eerie message sent a chill through the Odyssey's command bridge. A warning. But from what? The alien vessel had sent a distress signal, yet now it was urging them to stay away. Captain Elias Archer straightened, his instincts warring between caution and curiosity. Warnings in deep space were not to be ignored, but neither were the lives that could be in danger aboard that ship. "Alex, replay that transmission. Clean it up as much as possible," Archer ordered. Alex Chen worked quickly, isolating the message from the static interference. The translation software struggled, but fragments of the warning came through. "Stay, away, doomed, consumed, shadows, watching." The cryptic words sent unease rippling through the bridge crew. Shadows watching. That didn't sound like a simple malfunction or an abandoned wreck. Sergeant Dalton, ever the pragmatist, crossed his arms. "Captain, I don't like this. We have no idea what's in there. That ship looks like a graveyard." Archer didn't disagree, but he wasn't about to back off just yet. "Dr. Hayes, if there are survivors on board, what are the odds they're running out of air?" Dr. Fiona Hayes checked her datapad. Assuming similar biological needs to ours, and judging from the Odyssey's readings, their emergency power is draining fast. If there are any life forms on board, they may not have much time left. That settled it. Archer turned to Lieutenant Cassidy, who was still piloting the Odyssey at a cautious distance. "Bring us within 200 meters. Keep our weapons on standby, but non-aggressive." "Yes, sir." Cassidy eased the ship forward, the alien vessel growing larger on the view screen. As they approached, more details became visible. Strange markings lined the hull, symbols that resembled a mixture of angular runes and fluid script. Some parts of the ship looked burned, melted even, as if it had been subjected to intense energy weapon fire. "That damage isn't from space debris," muttered Morgan Blake, their navigator. "Something hit this thing. Hard." A sharp beep from the console made everyone snap to attention. "Captain," Alex said, eyes wide. "We're picking up a new energy source inside the ship. It just activated." "Activated?" Archer frowned. "What kind of energy?" "Unclear, but it wasn't there a moment ago," Alex replied. "It's pulsing. Almost like a beacon." Dalton's fingers instinctively tightened around his belt where his sidearm rested. Either something just woke up, or something just noticed us. Preparing for boarding, Archer made his decision. "We're going in." Dalton and Dr. Hayes exchanged a glance. They both knew this mission had just become a lot more dangerous. "Sergeant, get your team ready," Archer continued. "Dr. Hayes, prepare medical supplies. We don't know what we'll find, but if there are survivors, they might be in critical condition." Dalton smirked. "Roger that, Captain. Lock and load." In the lower decks of the Odyssey, the boarding team suited up in their reinforced exosuits. The suits weren't just designed for vacuum protection. They had built-in armor plating and atmospheric adapters in case of hazardous conditions. Dalton did a last-minute weapons check, ensuring the team had non-lethal energy charges as well as their standard sidearms. They weren't going in guns blazing, but they wouldn't be caught off guard either. Dr. Hayes adjusted her medpack, making sure she had enough supplies for various biological possibilities. The unknown was the biggest danger here. At last, the team gathered at the airlock. The docking arm extended, forming a sealed bridge between the Odyssey and the alien vessel. Archer's voice came through the comms. "Remember, this is first contact. We're here to assist, not provoke. Stay alert and report everything." The airlock hissed open. Beyond it, nothing but darkness. Inside the alien vessel, Dalton led the way, his helmet lights piercing the thick blackness. The ship's corridors were narrow, twisted, and strangely organic, as if the walls had been grown rather than built. "Anyone else getting a bad feeling?" whispered Private Jennings, the youngest of the team. "Pipe down," Dalton ordered, scanning the area. "Focus on the mission." Dr. Hayes checked her medical scanner. "I'm detecting trace oxygen, but it's thin, not breathable long-term." "Good thing we have suits," Dalton muttered. As they ventured deeper, something crunched beneath their boots. Morgan Blake bent down and picked up a small metallic shard. "Captain, I found something. Looks like a fragment of armor." Dalton examined it. The material was scared torn, as if something had violently ripped it apart. And then they saw them. The bodies, or rather, what was left of them. Scattered along the corridor were shredded alien remains, their bodies twisted in ways that defied natural anatomy. Deep claw marks gouged the walls, and the metallic floor was streaked with something dark. Not human blood, but something thicker, almost oily. "Dear God," Dr. Hayes whispered, clutching her medpack. Dalton knelt beside a partially intact body. The armor was unlike anything human, and the face beneath the shattered helmet was reptilian, with deep-set silver eyes, now lifeless. "They never had a chance," Jennings whispered. "Against what?" Morgan asked, voice tight. Dalton's voice came over the comms. "Captain, I think we just found out what they were warning us about." Before anyone could respond, the ship lurched violently. The lights flickered. A sound echoed through the corridors. A slow, rhythmic clicking. Not mechanical. Biological. Something else was here. Something alive. And it had just woken up. The fear sets in. A deep, guttural clicking echoed through the alien ship's corridors, reverberating off the twisted metal walls. It wasn't the sound of machinery. It was alive. The low-frequency vibration crept into their bones, setting every nerve on edge. Sergeant Dalton tightened his grip on his weapon, his helmet visor scanning for movement. The rest of the team was frozen, their senses hyper-aware, adrenaline already pumping through their veins. "Captain," Dalton spoke softly over comms. "We are not alone." The silence from the Odyssey's end of the line was brief. Then came Archer's voice, calm but urgent. "Stay sharp. What do you see?" Dalton's eyes swept over the corridor. The torn alien bodies, the deep claw marks, the dark, thick residue smeared across the walls and floor. Whatever had done this had been relentless, brutal, efficient. He didn't need to be a scientist to know this wasn't just a normal shipwreck. "Nothing yet, Captain," Dalton muttered. "But it's close." Private Jennings gulped audibly, his hand shaking around his rifle. "Sarge, it's hunting, isn't it?" Dalton didn't answer. He just motioned for everyone to move. "The hunt begins." They crept forward, deeper into the wreck, their boots carefully placed to avoid making unnecessary noise. The corridors were tight, labyrinthine, like something out of a nightmare. Some passageways had partially collapsed, forcing them to squeeze through jagged gaps in the walls. "Doctor, how's that scanner?" Dalton whispered. Dr. Hayes was glued to her bioscanner, her expression growing more troubled by the second. "Picking up life signs, but they're faint and fluctuating. I don't know if it's interference or..." A sound cut through the air. A scrape. Then another. Something was moving. Jennings turned too fast, his light flashing wildly down the corridor. That's when they saw it. The shadow in the dark. At first, it was nothing. Just a shape in the distance, half hidden behind a cluster of jagged wreckage. The flickering emergency lights barely illuminated it, but there was no mistaking the size. It was huge, and it wasn't alone. Multiple long, segmented limbs shifted, the black exoskeleton glinting in the dim light. The creature's elongated skull tilted, as if observing them. Dalton's gut twisted. Predator. Then it moved. Fast. Too fast. The thing darted out of sight, vanishing into the shadows above them. "Holy!" Jennings gasped, stepping back, his breath ragged. "Did you see that?" It climbed the wall. Dalton's eyes snapped up, but the thing was already gone. Eyes on the ceilings. He barked. Morgan cursed. "Great, it can climb. That's just fantastic." Dr. Hayes swallowed hard. "This thing, it's not just fast. It's hunting us. Nowhere is safe. Captain Archer's voice crackled through the comms. "Dalton, status." Dalton kept moving, scanning every shadow, his finger hovering over the trigger. "We've got company, Captain. At least one, maybe more. Hostile. Fast. It's playing with us." A long pause. Then Archer spoke, voice grim. "Get out. Now." Dalton didn't argue. "Move," he ordered. "Back to the airlock. Now." The team turned, breaking into a quick but controlled retreat. Their helmet lights swept the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. Every step felt heavier, every breath too loud. The ship's design was working against them. Too many tight turns, blind spots, overhead structures that something could be hiding behind. Jennings was shaking now. I think I hear something behind us." Then the corridor ahead of them collapsed. A massive chunk of twisted metal came crashing down, blocking their escape route. And the sound of skittering claws filled the air. Fight or die. Dalton barely had time to react before something lunged from above. The creature slammed into Jennings, its serrated limbs tearing into his suit. The private screamed as the thing lifted him off the ground, his rifle clattering uselessly to the floor. Dalton didn't hesitate. Fire. Gunfire erupted, bullets ripping into the creature's carapace. The high-caliber rounds shattered sections of its exoskeleton, sending black ichors splattering against the walls. The beast shrieked, a sound that sent a physical shockwave of terror through their bodies. But it wasn't alone. A second one dropped from the ceiling. It barreled into Morgan Blake, knocking her hard against the bulkhead. Her helmet visor cracked, her breathing sharp with pain. Dalton spun, unloading another burst, this time straight into the creature's elongated head. The rounds punched through its skull. The thing shuddered, then collapsed. Morgan gasped, crawling backward. I'm okay. I think." A third roar echoed through the ship. Dalton clenched his jaw. "We need to move." They dragged Jennings back. He was alive, but bleeding badly. Then a sudden blast of static filled their comms. Captain Archer's voice shouted through the interference. "Dalton, we're detecting multiple heat signatures. There's no more than 3. Dalton looked up. The darkness above them shifted. Dozens of glowing eyes opened, staring down from the rafters. Then, they started to drop. Dalton only had time for one thought. We were never rescuers. We were the ones being lured in. Escape or extinction. No more running. Dalton's breath came fast and sharp, his pulse hammering as he watched the creatures descend from the rafters. The glowing, soulless eyes of the aliens gleamed in the dim emergency lights. Their jagged limbs clacked against the metal walls, and the acrid stench of their blood filled the air from the one he had just shot down. The airlock was too far. The wreckage had cut them off. The only way out was through them. Weapons hot. "Light 'em up," Dalton bellowed, raising his rifle. A second later, the corridor erupted in gunfire. Bullets ripped through the swarm, piercing exoskeletons, sending black ichors splattering against the walls. Jennings, despite his wounds, managed to crawl behind cover, clutching his bleeding side as he fired single, desperate shots. Morgan, shaking off the pain, switched to incendiary rounds, her rifle lighting up the corridor with bursts of fire and sparks. The creatures screeched in agony, some falling back, their bodies convulsing as flames licked at their jagged limbs. But more kept coming. Dalton reloaded, his heart pounding. They weren't winning. They were holding ground, barely. A deafening bang shook the ship as one of the aliens lunged from the ceiling, slamming into the group. Dalton rolled, dodging serrated claws by inches. The creature was huge, bigger than the others, with thickened armor plates protecting its chest. A tank. It roared, lunging for Morgan. Dalton didn't think. He switched to his last armor-piercing rounds and fired point-blank. The first bullet dented the plating. The second punched through, but not deep enough. Then the third round hit home. A crack echoed through the corridor as the round burst through the creature's skull. It staggered, shuddered, then collapsed. Morgan let out a shaky breath. "Thanks," she gasped, coughing as she scrambled to reload. Dalton grabbed her by the collar, dragging her up. "No time for thanks. Move." But before they could take a step, the ship shook violently. A low, guttural hum filled the air. "Something is coming." Dalton's stomach dropped. That wasn't just the ship breaking apart. That was something activating. Dr. Hayes, still scanning, suddenly gasped. "Dalton," she whispered, eyes wide. "The life signatures. They are coming from deeper inside the ship." Dalton froze. "What?" Hayes stumbled backward, shaking her scanner. There's another level below us. And the readings, there's something massive waking up down there." Dalton's blood ran cold. The ship wasn't just a graveyard. It was a nest. Captain Archer's final order. A sudden beep blared through their helmets. "Dalton." Captain Archer's voice cracked through comms, his tone urgent. "Captain," Dalton barked back, still firing. "We're pinned. The ship's crawling with hostiles. Forget the fight. We just scanned the core. The ship is going to self-destruct." Dalton's stomach dropped. "What?" "Something's triggered a failsafe. You have 6 minutes before the reactor overloads. Get out now." Dalton didn't hesitate. "Everyone, fall back," he roared. Jennings staggered forward. Morgan hauled herself up. Hayes shoved her scanner into her belt and bolted. The aliens lunged after them, but the humans moved fast, too fast. Dalton switched to high-impact grenades, chucking them into the corridor behind them. The explosions rocked the ship, tearing holes in the walls, forcing the creatures to retreat. The lights flickered violently. A deep metallic groan echoed through the ship's hull as the reactor reached critical levels. 5 minutes, Archer barked. Dalton saw it, their only way out, a damaged ventilation shaft just above them. "Morgan, boost me up." Morgan knelt, locking her fingers together. Dalton stepped up, grabbing the vent's edges and hauling himself inside. He turned back, reaching down. "Jennings, you first." Jennings, still bleeding, jumped up, barely catching Dalton's hand. Dalton pulled him up, gritting his teeth against the strain. Morgan shoved Hayes up next, and Dalton caught her wrist, yanking her inside. Then it was Morgan's turn. She jumped, and a clawed hand snapped around her leg. Morgan's sacrifice. Dalton grabbed her arm. Morgan's eyes widened in pain. The alien's talons dug deep, pulling her down. "Dalton," she choked. Dalton yanked harder. The creature shrieked, its jagged teeth inches from her face. Dalton kicked downward, his boot slamming into the alien's wrist. The creature howled, its grip loosening. Morgan twisted free. Dalton pulled her inside just as the shaft collapsed behind them. Final countdown. The vent shook violently as the explosion rippled through the ship. Dalton, gasping, sprinted forward, his team right behind him. "Odyssey, we're coming in hot," he yelled. Captain Archer's voice was clear, strong, and ready. "Airlocks open. Move it." Dalton lunged out of the vent, landing hard on the Odyssey's boarding ramp. The others tumbled after him. Morgan hit the button. The airlock sealed. And then, boom! The alien ship detonated in a massive explosion, its wreckage scattering into space. Dalton lay there, gasping, shaking, staring at the burning remains outside the viewport. They had made it. Aftermath. The Odyssey's crew gathered in the medical bay. Jennings was stable, patched up. Hayes sat on a crate, silent, staring at the floor. Morgan, arms crossed, shook her head. "That wasn't a ship," she muttered. "That was a trap." Dalton looked at her. "More than that," he said. "It was a warning." Silence settled over the group. Then Captain Archer's voice came through the comms. "Dalton, you need to see this." Dalton frowned. "What?" Archer hesitated. Scanners are picking up more distress signals. Dalton's stomach clenched. They all knew what that meant. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The truth revealed, and a final stand. The silence in the Odyssey's control room felt heavier than the explosion that had just wiped the alien ship from existence. The crew stood motionless, eyes fixed on the screen where multiple new distress signals blinked across the holographic star map. Dalton clenched his jaw. More distress beacons, more traps, or something else. Captain Archer exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. This wasn't just some random ghost ship, he muttered. We walked straight into something bigger. Jennings, still bandaged but steady, leaned against the console. Sir, what if these distress signals aren't luring us in? What if someone's trying to warn us? The question hung in the air. Dalton exchanged glances with Morgan, Hayes, and the rest of the exhausted team. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to leave whatever horror they had barely escaped behind. But something felt unfinished. He looked at the wreckage still floating outside the viewport. The enemy they had faced. That wasn't just an attack force. That was something ancient, something organized. And it was far from over. The final decision. Captain Archer straightened. His face was lined with exhaustion, but his voice was firm. We have two choices, he said. One, we return home, report what happened, and hope to God we never see those things again. He let the weight of his words settle before continuing. Or two, we go after those distress signals. We find out the truth. Silence. Dalton's pulse pounded. He wasn't the type to rush into danger for no reason, but he'd seen what those creatures could do. If they were hunting, if there were more nests, could they really just walk away? Morgan was the first to speak. If there's a chance that someone's out there, needing help, she exhaled. We can't ignore it. Jennings nodded weakly, still sore but determined. We fight, or we wait until it comes to us. Hayes, always the voice of reason, sighed. If this thing is spreading, we're already involved. Dalton felt something settle inside him. The decision had already been made. Captain Archer looked at them all, then gave a small, approving nod. Then we prepare, he said. He tapped the console, locking in the new coordinates. The Odyssey's engines hummed as they turned toward the first distress beacon. Dalton took a breath, steadying himself. This was no longer just about survival. This was about finishing what had started. As the Odyssey moved forward, the wreckage of the alien ship disappeared behind them, swallowed by the cold vastness of space. The mission wasn't over. It was just beginning.